Good day, everyone. Today we are on class 3. We're going to start with a continuation of the discussion of Darwin's theories and why scientifically they don't hold water. It's been 165 years since the writing of his book, The Origin of Species. And in this book, he brought out the idea that all life has evolved from the very first bacteria cell. And if that is the case, we should have transitional species that link one type of creature to another. But as everyone knows, we are still missing the so-called missing link. And why is it that it doesn't exist, or why is it that we don't have any evidence for this? And of course, Charles Darwin himself raised this up, and he actually mentioned in his book that the Cambrian explosion, the fossil evidence contained within the Cambrian explosion, is a big problem for his theory. And in his book, he actually stated if no evidence is found in the fossils within 25 years of his writing of his book, that he would have to conclude that his theory is invalid. And of course, it's been over 165 years and we still don't have any fossil evidence to support his idea. So let's get started with an opening prayer. Heavenly Father, today as we view scientific evidences proving the great hoax of Darwin's evolutionary ideas, and as we look at the true scientific facts and where they direct us, we ask you to open our eyes and minds to your truths for how you have created and designed all things. Though the evidence may leave some of us with unease, I pray we will all eventually come to the realization of your handiworks. May we wonder at the reasons for why man continues to promote these lies to one another as well as to their children, their very own children, your children. And may we come to you, Lord. We pray for your wisdom and guidance, for finding ways to assist others in understanding these truths, so they may find a way back to you. We pray this, Father, in Jesus' name, amen. So today's class entitled Atheist's Wicked Hoax. And I use that term wicked in reference to this word that was used by famous atheists who terms religious people as wicked for denying science and believing and trying to spread the gospel of a creator. So that's why I chose that word. And we're going to go into a defense of that eventually in this class. So today's class will deal a great deal on scientific information, how genetic mutations prove we are not just randomly evolved, but individually made. We will get into the differences between species versus family or kinds, and how that relates to why we don't find the missing link anywhere, and that the missing link is just imagined and not real. We'll also get into transitional species and the fact that there exist living transitional species, and these actually prove and show that evolution is not a slow physical process. That is, the physical change from one type of creature and one type of environment to another is not something that requires millions of years, but can happen within weeks. And if that is the case, why is it that we do not find any missing links? Because that is the great excuse by the evolutionists. Their excuse is that the reason they haven't been able to show fossils is because evolution is such a slow process which requires millions and millions of years. Well, actual living transitional species will show and prove that evolution of physical capabilities is not slow, but very quick, within weeks and months. So there is absolutely no excuse we should not be able to find so-called missing link creatures if that is truly how creatures occur. And then we'll get into the explanation of the Cambrian explosion. And finally, we'll finish out today's class with philosophical defense. And we'll defend against Richard Dawkins, the atheist, claim against creationists being truly wicked. And then also we'll get into a logical defense for what to say to an atheist who claims God is not real, and why, when a person claims that God is not real, that atheist is actually confirming that they already know that God is real. So they are in essence being oxymoronic. So let's go ahead and get started now. In slide 4, I just want to say that there is fault on both sides, both the theists and the atheists. And I also want to point out why science is so crucial and important. The problem lies in the fact that atheists focus too much only on the physical things of the world and deny the spiritual things. On the other hand, too many Christians focus too much only on the spiritual side of things and want to reject discussions of any scientific things. And of course, this will lead to a great chasm between the two, a great divide. Because if you cannot get some sort of middle ground, how can you ever discuss anything with each other? So for Christians to reach out and connect to the atheist, we must start improving our language of communication. To do so, we have to understand what is language. Language is a series of sounds and intonations made up from the mind and throat of one person, an individual, resonating out to the world and to the other person, who will receive these sounds and gestures, and then interpret them in their own mind before replying back with his or her own set of intonations, sounds, and gestures. If we are to communicate better with the other person, we must put forth a language which they can appreciate and relate to until they can become comfortable enough with communicating back to us in a language which we can also appreciate. The problem for too long has been that Christians have tried to take the middle road. As their means of communication, they've taken the middle road of being theistic evolutionists. These are people who desire to share Christ by admitting Darwin is also correct. The problem with that is the other side only sees these types of Christians as half committed to their belief in Christ and God, and half committed to their cause for the evolutionists. To put it in man's words, they see all Christians as half-wits, which is not a good place to be placed into. So it is time for Christians to speak to them in a language they can understand, but with the true and correct scientific facts, which will logically compel them into making a decision against macroevolutionary theory and understanding how microevolution is at work, and that everything is created by an intelligent creator designer. This means Christians must become less lazy regarding science and the understanding of science, and instead educate themselves so they may share this knowledge of scientific truths to help atheists understand the true scientific evidence, which will then compel those atheists into making a decision to either accept or not accept these truths. They will no longer be able to hide any longer behind scientific falsehoods as taught in the public school systems, and they will be without excuse to face the reality of what is written upon their hearts. Because their hearts, in their hearts, they know, we all know, there is a God. Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 27 is talking about. Now humor me for a little bit, because this is a long passage, but I feel it's so applicable to our life today, to our world, that I need to read it in its entirety. Here's what it says in Romans chapter 1, verse 18 through 27. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God, nor gave thanks to him. But their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal men, and birds, and animals, and reptiles. Therefore God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen. Because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Man committed indecent acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their perversions. And the first thing that comes to mind when I hear that last verse is 8. If we continue on this road, where do we go? Now, in The Origin of Species, Charles Darwin questioned his theory. He said, why, if species have all descended from one another by fine gradations, is it that we do not everywhere see innumerable transitional species? In other words, why are all the creatures distinctly different, but we cannot find the middle transitional species from which this led to this? He's saying we should be seeing these not only in nature alive, but we should be finding it at least in the fossil evidence. But we do not find it in either scenes. Then he goes on to say, a crowd of difficulties will have occurred to the reader by now. Some of them are so serious that to this day, I can hardly reflect on them without being in some degree staggered. Basically, he's saying, I cannot stand, I have to sit because the evidence is so overwhelming against my theory sometimes, until we find some evidence. And in fact, he went on to say later regarding the Cambrian explosion, which we're going to talk about towards the end of the class, that within 25 years of writing this book, if we do not come up with some explanation for why this Cambrian explosion exists, I would have to admit my theory is incorrect. These are his words. 165 years later, you know what? We still haven't found the reason. But nobody from the other side will go and admit that or share that information with you. Let's talk about genetic mutations. Genetic mutations are important because Darwin said the reason we have all this diversity of life is because creatures undergo genetic mutations which change them slightly. And then these changes sometimes are favored and sometimes they're not. But when they're favored, the ones that are not, we will select them out through the natural selection process and they will die off. But if they're favored, they might favor them to survive better and they will proliferate and continue on. And this, if happens enough times, eventually will explain why we have such a diverse life form on the planet. So let's look at that. First question is, are all genetic mutations done by random chance the way Charles Darwin proposes? That's the first question. And secondly, if not, are there cases where genetic mutations are not random chance,
but they're actually encoded into the DNA of the creature, so they occur. Now, if that's the case, we have to ask, how does that happen? Because this goes completely against random chance. It means it was encoded, and if it was encoded, it means it was directed, and if it was directed, it means there was somebody directing it and encoding it, and there was a purpose behind it. Which means the question of how does inanimate, non-living matter give rise to an encoding process like this, first of all, to something as complex as the DNA, and then to program it so these mutations occur, is just mind-blowing, wouldn't you agree? Let's see what happens. So here we have some studies in the labs that were conducted on fruit flies. Fruit flies are often chosen by labs because they reproduce very quickly and they don't have to wait so long to see the results. And these are all changes of mutations which were directed into the fruit fly by the scientists. And the way these mutations occur is if you look at a DNA double helix of these creatures, what you will have is you'll have nucleotides that will, and the way you make a mutation occur is you take a section of the gene and you splice into it a mutation by taking another section and adding it here and cutting it out so that you change a few of the nucleotides. And then you have them become inseminated and mate and reproduce and see what happens. And the result is you may have a normal fruit fly that will give rise to stunted winged fruit flies, or in this case, the wings are stunted and crooked. In this case, you'll see they took a fruit fly and did a mutation. And you know, these are not ones that occur in nature. These are all lab controlled, done by man, just to see what the results are. Here you see legs growing out of their head. In this case, they have different shaped eyes and different colored eyes. And here, they grew an extra pair of wings. They're supposed to have two, but they grew two more. Now you would think when you see someone, oh, this guy should be able to fly really well. But no, these two actually impaired these two original ones, so they cannot fly. So if they were in nature, they would actually die because they can't fly and get their nectar. Okay? And of course, this guy would definitely not get chosen to be mated with. And then in this case, the eye colors being different or shapes of the eyes being different, would that help this creature to survive better? No, it wouldn't do anything as far as survival of the fittest, just they would have different colored eyes. So what we see is that in most cases, in fact, in 99% of cases of where genetic mutations occur randomly, they actually hinder the creature more than they help the creature. And so they just die out. Now let's look at some other cases of genetic mutations. What do we really see in nature as far as genetic mutations go? We'll see that genetic mutations are not always random. Often they are pre-programmed, which is a problem for Darwinian evolutionists. When you look in the world of nature, and you look at giraffes, for example, did you know that every single giraffe in the world has a different spotting pattern? This is how biology study them. They take photographs, and they match, and this is how they identify this giraffe versus this giraffe, okay, by their spotting pattern. If you go to Antarctica, emperor penguins will roost in colonies of 500,000 to 1 million strong. And this is all penguins all the way to the background. That's all the penguins, okay? Worse. And the way they work is the female penguin will lay the egg, and while the male goes out and feeds in the ocean for about 3 months, they'll come back, and the male will take over, and the female will go to the ocean and feed for 3 months and come back and take over, and they switch off, okay? When the penguin goes to the ocean and feeds for 3 months and comes back, do you know how it's able to identify its partner among all of them? Every single penguin has a different vocal intonation. So they go through the crowd until they find their partner, and then they switch feet. Gently scoot over so the egg doesn't touch the cold ground. The other one goes all the way to the ocean, dives in, feeds for a while, hops back up, comes back with a full belly. Every single whale in the world, on the underside of their flukes, have different patterns. Every lion on their tongue has different patterns. If nature truly had mutations that happen randomly, you know what you should see in the giraffes? About every, maybe 1 out of 20,000, you might have a different spotting mutation. But all of them should be the same otherwise, because it's random, right? Every penguin should be the same vocal intonation, except maybe randomly once every 100,000 or whatever. Same with the whales. And yet, it is this way for every single creature. What that means is that the mutation gene has been implemented into the code of the DNA of that creature so that when it is fertilized at insemination, it will come out with a different set of spotting patterns, intonations, or fluke patterns. Now, is this the only place we see this? No. Human beings have different sets of fingerprints and eye prints for every single individual. You have 8 billion people in the world, and did you know that even identical twins who are born 2 minutes apart from the same mom and dad have different fingerprints and eye prints? Think about that. So why is this? Well, from a creationist point of view, when I create something and it's important, I want to be able to identify it. This is the most expensive Corvette in the world. And the reason for that, it is the oldest Corvette in the world. It is production number, serial number 003. The first 2 were destroyed, I guess. I don't know. But this is the oldest one surviving. That's what makes it the most valuable. How do we know it's that one? Because of its serial number. Who put that identification marker on it? The manufacturer, the maker. This laptop has a serial number. Every single dollar bill in your pocket has a serial number. Whenever something is important to the maker, they have a means of identifying it. You and I should have the same fingerprint except every 100,000 people. That's not what happens out there. Here's what that means. Why and what does this say about you? Does possessing individual fingerprints and eye prints help you in any way to survive better? Right? And the answer is no. So why is it so important that it's written into the code of my DNA? And the way it works is this. When the female egg is attacked by all these sperm cells, every single sperm cell has a different DNA in it. And it's encoded to have a different fingerprint and eye print. It's going to be a different individual. Depends which one just gets there faster. And who put it there? For what specific reason has this occurred? We have to ask ourselves why, how, and by who. Do you desire to look at the fingerprint of God? Look at your own fingerprints. Look at the fingerprint of your child. You will see the fingerprint of God at work. Can chaotic random chance produce designed, orchestrated, directed instruction like this? No, that's the whole point of being random chance and chaotic. It doesn't have the ability to do that. But here, we're not even talking about dominant versus recessive. Here we're talking about every single giraffe, every single individual, every single whale, every single penguin. This is not dominant or recessive. This is every single one of them. So it means every single creature has been pre-programmed of certain size, has been pre-programmed to have that identification method. That's kind of mind-boggling. Yeah. And it raises the question of why. You are individually made, individually identifiable to your Creator. In Luke chapter 12, verse 7, here's what it says. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? yet not one of them is forgotten by God. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Now, when Jesus spoke this information, this verse, do you know that the number of hair follicles on your hair, on your head, is determined by your DNA? What this means is that 2,000 years ago, when Jesus spoke this verse, he already knew about the DNA. How else does he have the audacity to make a statement like that? Mind-boggling to think he already knew about this. Where does he get that information? Because the Creator already knew about it. He continues on. So do not be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. So let us remember this next time we are facing difficulties. We question if God is watching, if God even cares. Yes, he cares. He is watching. He is there. And God does not make mistakes. And he didn't make a mistake with you. So if you're wondering, am I just a problem child that nobody cares about? Do I just not matter? No. You matter. You are specially made. The answer is through you. It doesn't mean that you are the answer. You are not the answer or the centerpiece. And the message is not about you. But God has made you individually to be the answer to help someone discover the answer of Christ, our Redeemer. You are without replication. That's what that means. As the DNA in your cells have proven. God has made you uniquely to help the person whom he will place before you. God has chosen you as the person to provide the answer. He didn't choose me, he chose you. For what only you can provide through your unique personality, through what you have gone through, your qualities, not because you are perfect. What this means is, stop trying to be perfect before you think you have to go serve God. It ain't going to happen. So the answer is not you, the answer is through you that God will use you to reveal his Christ. You know, I cannot tell you personally how often I ask God the question of why me? Because I was an atheist for the first 33 years of my life. He saved my life 6 times, and I'm not talking about just like flippantly saying that. Literally, he saved my life 6 times. And I thought I just happened to be a lucky guy because I know God doesn't exist. So when finally he called me, I said, why me? There's so many better qualified people. And finally he answered, and he said, because I so decided. That was it. Because I so decided. And then he added this. Now move on. What that means is, move on. Do not dawdle. Do not waste time, because the harvest is too great. Get on with your calling. That's what he was telling me. If you have not taken the time to ponder this question of who am I, it is time. It's time to ask yourself, why haven't I taken the time to question myself? Why was I made by God? For what purpose was I created? And what is it he asks of me? The day you accept that you are uniquely made for a purpose, not here by some random chance, is the day you will start your journey of discovery. Corrie ten Boom said, the measure of life, after all, is not its duration, but its donation. Not its duration, but its donation. It's not how long you live that matters, it's how you live. People often ask, why does God allow suffering to occur? Why did he allow Jesus to go through that suffering and be nailed to the cross? You know why? Because for Jesus, he was not afraid of the duration. He was concerned. And it is in those difficult times that when we see people donate themselves for the greater good of human beings, that's what remains. God allows it for a reason. He allows it because he loves us and he wants us to understand. So I implore you to discover the answer to these questions. It will lead you on a journey of self-discovery like none other. And I pray that it will impel you, that means drive you forward to carry the banner for Christ. You know, I get carried away when I speak about the Lord because His love just, I can't understand the immensity of His love, and I don't know how to, all right. So now let's proceed to transitional species. So, are there true transitional living species which can transition from one type of environment, such as water, living in water, and then go to land directly? Water to air and flying, or land to air flying. Do these kind of creatures actually exist? Yes, there are a lot of them. And it happens very quickly. The second type of transitional species, which are imagined, which is often referred to as the missing link, they're saying you have one family or kind of animal which gives rise to another kind of animal. So they transition from one kind to another. These are the so-called missing link. They don't exist. That's why we still haven't found them after 165 years. But the reason that we haven't found these is because evolution is such a slow process that it takes millions and millions of years for minute changes, and this is why we still haven't found them. Well, if I can show you creatures that physically evolve from living in one environment such as water and go directly to air or land to air, would that not debunk this whole excuse of why we are waiting so many years? Right? Because it shows that evolution is not slow. Evolution is very rapid. So let's see what truly occurs. Now, in the Bible uses a word different than what biologists use. Biologists use the word family to describe different types of creatures. The Bible uses the word kind. So it's important for us to understand why these are the same. In Genesis 1, verses 11 through 24, here's what it says. Plants and trees were created on the land according to their kinds. Land produced vegetables, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit according to their kind. Great creatures of the sea, and every living thing which the water teems with according to their kind. Every winged bird according to its kind. Let the land produce living creatures according to their kind. Livestock, creatures that move along the ground, and wild animals, each according to its kind. Genesis uses this word kind over and over again. And it shows the distinctiveness, this distinction of different types of animals which were created. To understand this from a biological perspective, we kind of had to get a little education on how biologists look at different types of creatures in the world. So I know this may seem a little tedious, but I'll try to make it as simple as possible. So we need to put a check mark here for genetic mutations to microorganisms. In the very top, you see the term kingdom, and it says animalia. Basically, it means the animal kingdom. Animal kingdom is anything that's living that can move around on its own. And you see everything from insects, such as butterflies, to fishes that live in the oceans, to elephants, lions, foxes, wolves, dogs. These are domesticated dogs. But then when you go down, you see another word called phylum, and it says chordata. Phylum is the special group that it comes down to, and now you don't see the butterfly anymore, you see the fishes and so forth. And that's because in this phylum, chordata, every single creature has a vertebrae, a backbone. So fishes have backbones, elephants, lions, they all have backbones. You could also add into their creature, and they can't put everything in, but a crocodile would fit in there because it has a backbone. Now, if you go one more down, you see class. And under class, it says mammalia. This is the mammals. These are warm-blooded creatures. So this is where if the crocodile was in there, it would drop out. The crocodile is a reptile and it's cold-blooded. And fishes have dropped out because fishes are cold-blooded. So mammals, now what you could include in here would be dolphins and whales, because they are warm-blooded, and seals. But these are warm-blooded creatures. Then, if you drop down one more, you see order. And the order is carnivora, which means this order are all the animals that are carnivores. They eat meat. So that's what these creatures have in common. Then if you drop down one more, you see family, which is kind. And then this family, you see they all belong to what's called a dog family, commonly called the Canidae, or we use the term canines. Another family, if I wanted to put in separately, would be like the cat family, which would be the Felidae, or the felines. That would be everything from house cats to tigers and leopards and so forth. So that would be a different kind, right? Then if you drop down one more, you see genus. Now we're getting even more specific. This would be domestic dogs versus wild dogs. So this would be like wolves, coyotes, whereas these are all your domestic dogs. So this is right here, the species. The term that you hear on nature programs over and over and over is species, right? That's what they're dealing with. They overuse the term species when sometimes they should be using terms like genus, family, or order. And they do that purposely to confuse you. But here's what a species is. In the species, here's what happens. So in the domesticated dog species, we have things like German Shepherds, Poodles, Dachshunds, Shih Tzus, and Labrador Retrievers, Golden Retrievers, and Labradoodles. And the reason you can produce a Labradoodle is because you can take the species of the Labrador Retriever and have it mate with a poodle, and they produce an offspring. And that Labradoodle is not a hybrid, it is another species, because the Labradoodle can also produce progeny if it were to mate with another domestic dog. And that's what distinguishes a hybrid from a species. The species has the ability to continue on its line. This is why we have such variation of different domestic dogs and domestic cats, because they can do it. So Hollywood loves to misuse this. And I remember when our kids were little, back I think this was like late 90s, early 2000, there used to be a cartoon on this channel where it was a dog with a body shared by a cat.
Cat dog.
Cat dog! Cat dog! Cat dog! I remember I was teaching a class in apologetics during one of my food safety seminars, and I debunked this, and the guy, there was a grown man, he was genuinely honest. He goes, "You mean those things don't exist?" Seriously, he was not joking. He was really upset that they didn't exist. And we're going to get into how and why that doesn't work. So, everybody understanding a little bit of this, right? So now, let's show how this works. So here's what Darwin said. How can we account, on page 208 of his book, how can we account for species when crossed being sterile and producing sterile offspring, whereas when varieties are crossed, their fertility is unimpaired? So he himself was raising this question. Why is that within species, they can raise offspring unimpaired and they're fertile, but when you start going to a little further off, they only produce sterile hybrids? Because if that happens, how is it possible that one kind can generate another kind that's even more distant? That's what he was asking to the reader and to himself. And then he continues on. But as by this theory, meaning his theory, innumerable transitional forms must have existed. Why do we not find them embedded in the countless numbers of the crust of the earth? In other words, why are we not finding any signs of this in the fossil findings that we find? So again, he's questioning his theory. Page 412. I have enumerated the chief objections. One, namely the distinctness of specific forms and their not being blended together by innumerable transitional links, is a very obvious difficulty for my theory, is what he's saying. So he's admitting his theory is having a lot of difficulty when it comes to transitional forms, even though his big proposal is that humans have come from eggs and everything came from each other. But he's finding difficulty to prove this right now. He's saying in the future we should find evidence for this. But like I said, it's been 165 years and we have not found it yet. And the question is why? And the reason for that is because this is how it actually works. Now, what you have here is a donkey that belongs to what's called the ass, and the horse. Both of these belong to the family or the kind that we call the equine or the equidae. When you make these two, they produce a hybrid known as a mule. All of you have heard of mules, right? The thing about mules, people like them because they have the strength of the stallion, but the stamina of the donkey, and they're very good for work, especially for as pack animals. If you go to Arizona, Grand Canyon, they're usually using mules or donkeys to get people down. The thing about a mule is it's a hybrid, and here's what a hybrid is. A hybrid cannot mate and produce progeny. It is completely sterile. So, if this mule found another mule and mated with it, nothing happens. If this mule mates with a stallion, nothing happens. If the mule mates with a donkey, nothing happens. So when this mule dies, that's the end of it. In order to produce more mules, you have to take another horse and another donkey in order to produce another mule. That's why it's called a hybrid and not a species of its own. If it was able to produce progeny, then the mule would be a separate species of its own. Here's what nature programs. Species, 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 all coming from each other. And they completely mix you up. And then they'll give you another example. Species, species, species. No, this is a hybrid. Therefore, Darwin's evolutionary work, and everything seems to make sense. These guys belong to the cat family, right? The felines. A lion, this is a male lion, and a female tiger. Because they belong to the same family, it's the same kind, they can mate, and they'll produce something called a liger. Now, a liger is a male lion with a female tiger. That's a liger. If you have a male tiger and a female lion, you actually produce something called a tyan. In that case, what you would see a picture of is a head of a male tiger and the body of a female lion without stripes. That's a tyan. Both of them are hybrids. Both of them are sterile. If this was to mate with another liger, you get 0. If this mates with this, you get 0. If this mates with this, you get 0. When it dies, that's it. You want to produce more ligers? They got to do it again. So, even within creatures of the same family, when they start getting too distant, the sterility is hampered. How is it possible that we're supposed to come from all of? Because the separation of, remember the DNA separation, we covered this last week. The DNA separation under similar features between ape, chimpanzees, and human beings was 4%. And that 4% worked out to a number of 240 million nucleotides. You know what the difference is between these guys? Only about 100 or 50 or so. So if that produces sterile, 240 million nucleotides being different, you think it's possible? Not even a chance. That's the reality of the real world of nature. The variance is too great. Once you start going further away, it is impossible for that to occur. So, just to sure everybody understands what's going on here. First question, how many different species are pictured in this slide? Anybody? 4, that's right. 1, 2, 3, 4. These 2 are hybrids, they're not species. That was a trick question, that was good. So we only have 4 species there. How many different species are pictured for each family? 2, that's right. This family has 2. This family has 2. These guys are not species. How many different families or kinds are pictured here? 2. You have the equine family, and then you have the feline family. In nature program, you would say species after species all come from each other. They're all interrelated, and we can see it through things like mules and ligers. And it sounds, oh, yeah, that makes sense. They just showed me how this species produces mule, this species produces that liger. So species, yeah, okay, different species. So confusing. Now let's look at some real living transitional forms. These guys are alive, they are bound, and they change shapes and they change environments very quickly. And what does that prove? That physical evolution from one environment to another is not time limited. It is limited actually by the information in their DNA. So the time excuse goes out the door, which means it was pre-programmed to happen that way. So that raises the question of who pre-programmed it that way, okay? Because random chance doesn't program. These scientists know the truth, and yet they're not willing to admit the truth. They're willing to continue the lie. And the question is why? When you have based your whole entire career on the books that you have published, and you come out and admit you were wrong, your whole career becomes nothing, okay? Your whole life becomes a lie. It is better for them to live the lie and continue the lie than to admit the truth. And that is what's happening out there. And they would rather take down the innocent children and their lives for their own greed. Let's look at a common frog. Here's a frog that hops around on land, breathes air, will lay eggs in the water or sometimes on leaves above the water. The eggs fall in, turn into a tadpole. A tadpole has fins like a fish, can swim in the water, and breathes underwater. Lives entirely underwater. Then within weeks, it starts to grow legs, and the tail disappears. It starts to form lungs inside of itself so it can breathe air. Then it hops out eventually onto the land and becomes a frog, which completely lives on the land and breathes air. This entire transition is called metamorphosis. This entire metamorphic transition takes place within a few weeks. Now, according to Darwinian evolutionists, such an event should take hundreds and hundreds of millions of years to occur. A few weeks, that's it. And is this uncommon? No, we see it everywhere. So Darwin's hoax, completely destroyed. Let's look at the butterfly. Starts life as a caterpillar that can barely crawl, will eventually go into the chrysalis or the cocoon stage. Do you know what's amazing about a chrysalis? This caterpillar that can barely crawl, when it goes into the cocoon chrysalis stage, as the outer shell starts to harden, the cells of the caterpillar completely dissolve into a liquid soup that is formless. Then the cells somehow know they have to rearrange completely into a different creature like a butterfly. It's orchestrated so every cell that used to be part of the caterpillar now knows where it's supposed to go to become a totally different creature like a butterfly that can fly. From barely crawling on land to flying in the air, and the cells know how to rearrange themselves to do this formation. And then after a few weeks in there, it comes out and it just takes flight. The cells haven't changed either. They only rearranged. The DNA in the cells is exactly the same. It is what's driving the information for them to do that. It's all pre-programmed. The information is in the DNA. The cells have not changed. Only the creature has changed. So according to Darwin's time excuse, this type of physical change, again, should require billions of years. It happens before your very eye. If you've ever seen the monarch butterflies down in Mexico, where they originate from, they're all hanging in trees like this, and all of a sudden, they all just take off. It's amazing. And then they fly all the way up to, and then they make it all the way back to Mexico and do it again. That's right. That's right.
It's crazy.
Nature makes it apparent. It's just we refuse to admit it. This is from water to land. This is from land to air. Now we're going to show you water to air. The common dragonfly will dip down, it flies around, and as it flies around, it'll get over a body of water that it likes, and then it'll dip its tail down and touch the surface. Every time it's doing that, it's laying an egg. And as it's laying an egg, this egg eventually becomes a dragonfly nymph, starts to undergo changes. When it's ready to mature, it'll find a twig that's coming out of the water, climb up to it, and dry out. And then it'll pop out of its shell and come out as the dragonfly and start taking off. Several weeks, that's it. From water to air. Doesn't even need to be on land. Metamorphic change, not required by hundreds of millions of years of evolution. 3 different cases proving Darwin's hoax is a hoax. Transitional species, do they exist? Yes. Are they missing links? No. Why not? Because the missing link is an imagined theory. Okay? And the reason it's missing is because it doesn't exist. That's why it's missing. You can't find something that doesn't exist. So to think that apes can go to humans, or canines to felines, or reptiles to birds, that's just dude. Let me just say, even if it took 1,000,000 years, I should see something in between. And they should be living, and I should find them in Africa or in the cities or something, you know? People innately know this. People innately know this. When's the last time you heard of an atheist who was having some major problems he was going through and says, you know, I need to get some sound advice. Let me go to my old sage, go to the LA Zoo and see if I can talk to a gorilla. Maybe they have some better information, because the therapists aren't helping. These guys are much older, they should have some good answers. No, of course not. When's the last time you heard of a guy in the trench war, when the bombs are falling, go down, help me, chimpanzee? Have you ever heard of that? The very early minute before that, he was talking about why he doesn't believe in God. Do you know what happened to Richard Dawkins? He was in a debate with, I think it was Don Lennox, who is a Christian mathematician. And he was criticizing how Christians don't, for all their beliefs, they don't even know how to name like the first 4 books of the Bible. So then Don Lennox turned around and said, well, do you know the name of Charles Darwin's book? And he said, yeah, Origin of Species. And then Don Lennox says, no, not that title, the complete title, which I went through with you guys earlier. And he was like, it's scary. And after about a minute of flabbergasted, he goes, oh God. The whole crowd erupted laughing because they saw in desperation where he turned. The very entity he was denying. It's on YouTube. You can find it. It's hilarious. He's like, oh God. We know where to turn when things get desperate. We just don't want to admit it. So, Darwinian evolution has no evidence to support their theory for missing links, or to connect the diversity of life that exists on Earth. Their so-called transitional species, when they find fossils like this, what they'll do is in museums, they'll take similar ones like that, and then they'll make up this to show that these legs have come out of this creature. But here's the real skeleton of a crocodile, which came into existence over 200 million years ago, and still exists today. The skeletal structure of this would be exactly or very similar to this if this was available, but this is all encrusted with mud. So they try to show that this comes up to this. But if you look at the skull structure, you see it's almost very identical. And here's what this crocodile is saying. After 200 million years, he's just like, I've been here for 200 million years, I'm still waiting for myself to evolve, but nothing's happening. Why is it still here? Why hasn't that transitioned on? And one of the things that people say is because we transition on because we're trying to get into better forms of life that can survive better. And one of the ways they try to show this is if you look at the Darwin's tree of life, the coelacanth, which is a fish that came at the very early stage, way before dinosaurs and frogs and all of these. This came into existence 360 million years ago, and they say that these things eventually became legs, and the fish crawled out of the water and became a land creature. And these are their supposed different types of evolutionary fossil that they think occurred. The fins should have turned into legs. 360 million years ago, died off 80 million years ago. Therefore, none of them have been in existence for 80 million years. 1938, Chaluma River, South Africa, they found a living coelacanth. Now you find them in aquariums throughout the world, everywhere. They were supposed to have died off 80 million years ago. They are the originators of legs for land animals. They haven't changed. So here's what God does. He says, behold my duck-billed platypus. That's right. God definitely has a sense of humor. He says, wait until they get a load of this guy. I'm going to give them a creature, the duck-billed platypus, that has a mouth like a duck, flippers to swim through the water like fins. But he's going to be a mammal, not cold-blooded. But being a mammal, he's still going to lay eggs like a reptile. And he's been around for 112 million years, and he's still a duck-billed platypus waiting in Australia to change. This guy, who's been watching nature programs, is like, I'm so confused. They tell me I'm supposed to transition, and but I'm just a platypus. I don't know what to be. Here's what Darwin said. Why do we not find rich fossiliferous deposits belonging to these assumed early periods before the Cambrian system? I can give no satisfactory answer. The case at present must remain inexplicable and may be truly urged as a valid argument against the views here entertained. And this is what the Cambrian period is, this period right here. It existed for about 35 million years between the periods of 540 and 505 BC. For about 35 million years. And what we see in the fossils from this period are all these different distinct forms of life. There's tons of them. So you would think if we have tons of these distinct forms of life, if we looked in the fossil layer below that, which would be older, right? Because it's deeper. We should find transitional forms leading up to that from like the bacteria and algae, right? There's nothing. And Darwin knew about this, and he's asking the question, why is it that we do not see any transitional forms here leading up to all the diversity of life that we see in the Cambrian period? And he said, within 25 years of the writing of this book, if we don't find evidence for this, to support this, my theory would be wrong. And it's been 165 years, and we still don't see it. So the question is, why do we still believe in this missing link when we have living transitional species that prove we can physically change within weeks, and it doesn't require hundreds of millions of years? And we've shown that mutations are not random, but they're pre-programmed by the evidence that we see in the animals. Why do we still push this agenda? The twisted mind of man has no boundary. Ilya Ivanovich Ivanov, Soviet scientist, biologist, who specialized in the field of artificial insemination and the interspecific hybridization of animals. He is famous for his controversial attempts to create a human-ape hybrid by insemination, and he wanted to create a world of what he coined human Z. Humans and chimpanzee, human Z. In 1910, he gave a presentation to the World Congress of Zoologists in Graz, Austria, in which he described such a hybrid artificial insemination experiment. In 1920, funded by Joseph Stalin and the communist movement, who were all atheists, carried out a series of experiments to create human, non-human ape hybrid in French Guiana. 3 female chimpanzees were inseminated with human sperm, but he failed to create pregnancy. Then they took the ovaries of a human female, implanted it into the chimpanzee female, and tried the experiment again, hoping that it would work. Again, it was a failure. Then in 1929, he attempted to organize a separate set of experiments involving non-human ape sperm. This time they're taking the ape sperm and injecting it or inseminating into a human female. And the experiment, again, was a failure. In 2011, the first season of the episode of the sci-fi horror series called Dark Matter's Twisted Future, or Twisted But True, I think it's on Netflix, features a segment titled Ape Man Army, in which the theories of Ivanov on human-ape hybridization are dramatized. And this is not the last time. There have been other experiments that they have tried, the atheist scientists, but you just don't hear about it because they end in failure and they don't want to admit their failure. Now, in 2019, this is only 3-4 years ago, guys, taking place at the Salk Institute of Biological Studies. I don't know if you've ever driven down the 5 freeway towards San Diego, but when you enter La Jolla, there's a huge building to the left. I've seen it many times because I used to teach classes in San Diego. There's a huge building to the left called Salk Institute. Taking place at the Biological Studies section of the Salk Institute, scientist Carlos Belmonte inseminated 132 monkey embryos with pre-programmed human cells. So they wanted to tweak the experiment so it would have a better chance to work. So they didn't just take regular human cells, they took pre-programmed human cells, which means what they did is they went into the DNA of the humans, they took the segments that they thought would fit the best into the chimpanzees and have a better chance of working, and then they inseminated that into the embryos of 132 apes. Within 20 days, all embryos were dead. Not one single. This is not 100% failure, because 1 out of 100 would be 100%, right? The 100 would be 100. This is 132% failure. How much longer will this insanity continue? I'll tell you how much longer. As long as the funding continues by atheists because they want to support their cause against God. How much longer? So that's the end of the class. The next two sections, if you want to stay, and for those who want to leave, I can understand. So let me just say the closing prayer in case there are those who want to leave, or need to leave rather. Gracious Father, we now possess the information whereby all main tenets of Darwin's theory are proven false. It is plain to see from scientific evidences shared during our first three classes that the public schools, the so-called scientists, the television nature programs, the followers of naturalism, and many others who have no further excuse for promoting their falsehoods of macroevolution. This does not, however, mean they do not possess a reason for promoting their lies. For Satan's army desires to mislead as many away from you as possible by making nature their God, the creation placed above the Creator. O Lord, I cry out to you, O Lord. Give us your guidance and wisdom on how we as Christians may go about producing changes in our world. Changes that might remove the scales from the eyes of the blind. Men so blinded by their desire to deny you that they are willing to continue believing the lies of evolution, though they can plainly see there is no scientific evidence to support their false beliefs. Help us set them back on the right path, the path of truth, the path of your truth. We pray this, Father, in the name of Jesus.
Yes, amen.
Here's what Richard Dawkins has said. Before I get into that, let me define the word wicked as shown on the dictionaries. The word wicked means evil or morally wrong, intending to or capable of harming someone or something. That's the definition of wicked. Here's what Richard Dawkins says. He's been quoted as saying, "It is absolutely safe to say that if you meet somebody who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is either ignorant, stupid, or insane, or wicked, but I'd rather not consider that." We've already proven that none of this works. Based on his statement and based on true scientific fact that we've just gone through of Darwin's evolution, any person who continues to push Darwinian evolution in public schools, universities, and TV programs, in my mind, is either ignorant, stupid, or insane, or wicked, but I would rather not consider that. That's what I say. Question: what are the wicked intentions of atheists for promoting Darwinian ideas in spite of the true scientific evidence? Why does the great hoax continue? The great Darwinian evolutionary hoax does not continue because they believe they are in the right. The great hoax does not continue because they believe in science, as they so dearly claim. If you listen to Bill Nye on TV, he's constantly saying, "Children, go study science. You'll see there's no God." The great con is not proliferated because they are too dumb to understand the true scientific evidence. That is plain for everyone to see. And the wicked, morally wrong continuation of their great swindle, defined as fraudulent scheme, is not because they are concerned with your understanding for true science. Their continuous spewing of this false narrative, in spite of the true scientific evidence, which is so clearly apparent to all honest, open-minded to see, is the battle over souls between Satan and Christ. The more children they can capture with their wicked misinformation, the less children will turn towards a desire to understand who their Creator is, and the more they are likely to end up choosing hell over heaven. It's that simple. It is the reason why religion and the Ten Commandments have been taken out of the public schools. Not all religions, just Christianity. Because other religions are allowed to be freely discussed and celebrated in public schools, at shopping malls, and at dinner conversations. It is only Christianity that is banned from being spoken. Why? Because Christianity, possibly, could it be? Because Christianity is the only message that carries the truth of the Savior. Is that why Satan is so against it compared to the other ones? He doesn't care about the other ones. He only cares about Christianity. So that answers his statement. Now let's go to answering. Winston Churchill said, it is not enough to do our best. Sometimes we must do what is required. This is what he said when England was being attacked by the Germans. It is thought by historians that if Winston Churchill did not lead the UK, all of Western society would have fallen. Jesus asks a lot of us, but then Jesus gave a lot also. Are you willing to go out and actually share this truth? It's one thing to have the truth now. It's another to just sit on it. We can't just sit on it. We have to make a decision. Okay? You're going to get opportunities. That's why God has you here, to receive the information. He doesn't have you here to receive the information for no reason. There's a reason behind it. And it is not just for us to keep it for ourselves. Okay, next question. How do you deal with an atheist who claims, excuse me for a second while I get my wallet out. How do you deal with an atheist who claims that God is not real? Now, if they're asking this question, or stating this statement rather, that God is not real because God cannot exist based upon the theory of evolution and the evidence for evolution, now you have the information to be able to speak to them and share with them. But if the atheist is bringing up a philosophical argument for why God doesn't exist, then you have to have a different defense for that. So this is a logical defense for how you defend that God is not real, why that doesn't make sense, and why an atheist who makes such a statement is actually an oxymoron, and therefore he has already confirmed that God exists and that God is real. By merely making that statement, he has confirmed that God is real. So, what do you say to an atheist who says that God is not real? Now, I'm going to give you something. $100 bill. I'm going to give it to you in exchange for a $100 bill you have. Any takers? Nope. It's real. I'm telling you, it's real. Look, real. Why is nobody? Okay, just give me $20. I'll give you this. Why is nobody taking me up with this offer?
Counterfeit.
How do you know it's counterfeit? How do you know it's counterfeit? No, it's
Because I worked in a bank and I was trained to know the difference.
There you go. What did they teach you when you worked at a bank?
All the markings and all the little details in a real bill.
Okay.
And how to
In a what? In a what?
In a real bill.
Ah. Did everybody
A
catch that?
genuine. Yes.
Did everybody catch that? How did they teach the bank teller to tell fake ones? By studying the
Real one.
real one. The only way I can deny that something is not real is if I have first experienced the real one. Otherwise, I can never state that this is not real. So when an atheist states that God is not real. He is actually saying, I'm making such a statement because I have experienced the real God. And I know this God isn't it. Otherwise, he could logically not make such a statement. The only statement he could make is, I don't know if God is real or not. I just have not personally experienced him yet. Which would make you an agnostic, not an atheist. Okay? So there are no real atheists out there. This is what in the first class we talked about. Atheists want all the things that God can provide. They want hope. They want purpose in life. They want to do the right things, while at the same time denying the source from which all of those things come. The only atheist that is a true atheist is a nihilist who says there is no purpose to life, there is no hope in life, there is no meaning in life, and there's no point of life other than just to live life with rest and have fun. And then when your days are done, that's it. Everybody else who wants any of the other things that God provides and says they're an atheist is not really an atheist. They are agnostic. So here's what it works. Here's how it works. If I say something is fake, and I'm comparing it to another fake, the only reason I can say those are both fake is because I know the real one exists. If I say this one is real and that one is fake, again, the only reason I know this is true is if I know the real one. Unless I know the real one, I cannot make either of these claims. Therefore, if I say God is not real, I've already confirmed that I know the real God. Therefore, that's why I'm making such a statement. It's just like a blind person can never say color doesn't exist or this is not red. If they've never experienced color or seen red, how can they say that this is not red? They can only make such a statement if they have experienced color and have seen red color. Then they can say, oh no, this isn't red, this is blue. And if they've done that, they've already confirmed they're not blind. They can see. So logically, do you see where this is going? So sometimes you have to use your logic to break down statements. And people are making statements, not always because they're trying to put a con on you or anything, but sometimes this is what they understand, this is what they believe. So what we have to do is try to listen to it and answer those questions the best we can. So in conclusion, the missing link is missing because it does not exist. Any questions? Thank you guys.
Thank you.
In you, I have my breath. In you, I have my being. When I was far away, you called my name. Before the dawn of time, before my soul awakened, my heart was seen and claimed by your great love. Author, finisher, you're the author and finisher. You're the author and finisher. I lift my hands up, I lift my hands up, all things begin with you, and you'll finish everything that you have said that you'll do. I lift my hands up, I lift my hands up, all things begin with you, and you'll finish everything that you have said that you'll do. I lift my hands up, I lift my hands up, all things begin with you, and you'll finish everything that you have said that you'll do. I lift my hands up, I lift my hands up, all things begin with you, and you'll finish everything that you have said that you'll do. Author, finisher. You're the author and finisher. You're the author and finisher. You're the author and finisher.